One-Up Media.
On July 29, 1975, a tropical storm began to take shape in the Philippine Sea, gradually tracking northwestward towards Taiwan. By August 1st, the storm had intensified into a typhoon as it swept across Taiwan, resulting in 25 fatalities, 168 injured, and significant structural damage. With winds roaring at speeds of up to 250 kilometers per hour, the typhoon had left Taiwan battered and was now moving towards mainland China. On July 31st, the typhoon's strength peaked and was given the name Nina, as it continued its destructive path with unyielding power. By August 3rd, Typhoon Nina had made landfall in China, proceeding to carve its path across the mainland before eventually coming to a halt over Henan Province on August 5th. It was here that the Banqiao Dam stood, celebrated for its sturdy construction and a symbol of their journey towards becoming a prosperous nation. Even though the dam was known for its strength, the heavy rains from Typhoon Nina caused the water levels to rise above the dam's limit. By August 8th, the water had risen by about 30 centimeters above the dam's capacity. The relentless force of the water eroded the dam's embankment, causing it to give way under the immense pressure. Despite its sturdy construction, the dam's walls yielded to the overwhelming power of nature in mere moments. A colossal wall of water, stretching 10 kilometers in length, towering over 5 meters high, and hurtling at speeds of up to 50 kilometers per hour, surged across the level plains of Henan Province, leaving devastation in its path. It obliterated all structures in its wake, ripping apart roads, bridges, and vital infrastructure such as power and communication lines. Entire villages were engulfed and carried away by the relentless torrent. As the floodwaters surged downstream, additional dams succumbed to its force, collapsing one by one in a domino effect. This catastrophic event resulted in an estimated 230,000 lives lost to drowning. From One-Up Media, this is Mass Murders. Henan Province, nestled within the heart of the central plains of China, finds itself bordered by mountainous terrain, with the expansive Huai River Valley at its core. The unique geographical features of this region, characterized by the encircling mountains and vast plains, have bestowed upon it a significant area for water catchment that eventually converges into the Huai River. While the presence of the river brings undeniable benefits to the local communities, providing essential water resources for agriculture, industry, and daily life, its unpredictable nature poses significant challenges. During periods of heavy rainfall, the river swells rapidly, leading to floods and widespread damage to property and infrastructure. Conversely, during times of drought, the river's flow diminishes, leaving communities parched and unable to get the water they desperately need. It is this dichotomy, wherein the Huai River alternates between periods of abundance and scarcity, that underscores the urgent need to address the issue. Consequently, over the years, in response to the challenges posed by flooding and the opportunity to harness the region's ample water resources, numerous dams have been constructed across the province. Beginning in the early 1950s, a monumental undertaking known as the Harness the Huai River Initiative was kicked off, focusing on the construction of 3 pivotal reservoirs and dams within the Jumadian region. Among these, the Banqiao Dam stood as the cornerstone of this ambitious project. The overarching objectives of this long-term endeavor were twofold. Firstly, to mitigate the recurring threat of flooding by enhancing flood control measures, and secondly, to capitalize on the region's water reserves for agricultural irrigation and hydroelectric power generation. With this ambitious goal in mind, the local government embarked on a monumental undertaking, beginning the construction of the project in April of 1951. However, as the endeavor unfolded, they soon discovered a multitude of daunting obstacles looming on the horizon. The first challenge arose with the Chinese construction workers themselves. At the time, these workers lacked experience in the construction of major reservoirs. Many of them had only been involved in smaller-scale dam projects in neighboring regions, which meant they lacked the experience needed to handle a project of this size. As a result, the design and construction process was entirely overseen by experts from the Soviet Union. In fact, many of the dams constructed in China during that era received substantial help from Soviet advisors. Following over 15 months of arduous labor, by 1953, the construction of the dam had concluded, signaling the near completion of the monumental Harness the Huai River project. However, as time passed, the once imposing concrete walls of the dam began to betray signs of wear and tear, with numerous small cracks beginning to mar their surface. Recognizing the potential threat posed by these structural vulnerabilities, a reinforcement project was promptly initiated from 1955 to 1956, with explicit directives provided by advisors from the Soviet Union. In 1949, in the wake of Chairman Mao Zedong's ascension to power and the establishment of the communist government, an ambitious initiative to bolster dam construction was set into motion across China. Motivated in part by Mao's vision to modernize the nation, a cornerstone of this strategy entailed the building of over 100 dams in Henan Province. This concerted effort was a pivotal component of China's sweeping Great Leap Forward campaign, launched to propel the country into a new era of development and prosperity. By the late 1950s, this initiative had culminated in the construction of more than 100 dams within the Zhoumadian region alone. Among these monumental projects, the Banqiao Dam stood out as one of the largest and most ambitious undertakings envisioned by Mao. However, amidst the fervent push to advance dam construction projects, there was one man who advocated for caution and careful consideration. Chen Xing, then serving as the chief engineer overseeing the dam projects, emerged as a staunch critic of the prevailing approach. Chen recognized the government's dedication to dam construction as a means to propel the nation towards prosperity. However, amidst this fervent pursuit of progress, he feared that environmental considerations might have been overlooked. Firstly, he warned that an excessive emphasis on reservoirs' water storage functions could potentially exacerbate the risk of catastrophic flooding and other calamities, including the alkalinization of farmland. Alkalinization occurs when the soil becomes excessively alkaline due to an imbalance in its pH levels, often caused by the accumulation of salts and minerals from water sources. This change in soil composition can render the land infertile and unsuitable for cultivation, posing a significant threat to agricultural productivity and food security. If the farmlands in the area were to become alkalized as a result of the dam's operations, it would render the reservoir's water storage function largely ineffective, as the agricultural land it was intended to support would be rendered barren and unusable. Secondly, and perhaps more alarmingly, he cautioned that a sudden increase in the number of dams and reservoirs could inadvertently elevate the water levels in Henan to hazardous heights, paving the way for potential disaster. Despite Chen's warnings, his perspective was dismissed, and he endured harsh criticism, being labeled as a rightist and opportunist. As a result, he was later removed from his position and banished to Xinjiang as a consequence of his opposition to the prevailing ideology. Perhaps the government should have listened, because Chen would be right, and Mother Nature was about to make that painfully clear. During the period of the Great Leap Forward initiative, the emphasis on retaining more water was seen as a strong commitment to the Chinese Revolution. The dams were more than just a practical infrastructure goal. It embodied a profound ideological commitment to revolutionary principles, deeply rooted in Chinese culture and history. In traditional Chinese philosophy, water has long been revered as a symbol of vitality, prosperity, and abundance, with numerous ancient sayings extolling its virtues. The concept of retaining more water resonated with the age-old wisdom found in phrases such as "harmony with nature brings prosperity," or "water brings life to the land." The government's focus on constructing reservoirs and dams for water storage mirrored these long-standing cultural values, portraying the initiative as a manifestation of the nation's collective will to usher in a new era of prosperity and progress. Thus, the emphasis on retaining more water during the Great Leap Forward was not merely a pragmatic endeavor, but a symbolic gesture imbued with profound ideological significance. In addition to water, Chairman Mao saw the need for China to rapidly industrialize. He understood that steel production served as a crucial cornerstone of China's economic advancement and envisioned that within 15 years of initiating the Great Leap, China's industrial output would eclipse that of the UK. Despite his lack of expertise in metallurgy, Mao urged the establishment of small backyard furnaces across the nation to produce steel from scrap metal. His orders, starting in 1958, led to citizens melting household items, including pots and pans, to make steel. However, despite the assertions of intellectuals, engineers, and technicians that melting pots and pans to produce steel was unfeasible, Chairman Mao disregarded their counsel and instead placed his confidence in the collective mobilization of the Henan people. It wasn't until 1959 that he discovered that high-quality steel could only be produced in large-scale factories using reliable fuel like coal. Consequently, he chose to quietly abandon the program later that year. Mao's influence over his people was immense, with many regarding him almost as a god, despite the widespread famine and poverty they endured. During the steel-making campaign, their unwavering loyalty led to the cutting of hundreds and thousands of trees to fuel the backyard furnaces. And as a result of the rampant deforestation, soil in the forest started to loosen, setting the stage for potential disaster as the rainy season approached. It was late July 1975, and as rain began to fall in the region, the gates of most dams were kept closed to retain as much water as possible. During most of the summer, the land suffered from a severe drought, leaving fields barren and rivers nearly dry. Now, with rain approaching, it was crucial to save as much water as possible. While the coastal areas faced the full force of Nina's fury, the impact on inland regions was somewhat limited, which hinted at a possible weakening of the typhoon's force, offering hope to those residing further away from the coast. As Typhoon Nina traveled further northward into the mainland, it gradually weakened and transformed into a storm. This likely brought a sense of relief to many in the area, as the destructive force of the winds associated with typhoons is often a primary concern. However, storms can also pose significant danger, particularly in terms of heavy rainfall, which can be just as deadly under certain conditions. Over the next 3 days, the lingering effects of Typhoon Nina unleashed heavy rainfall upon Henan Province. At the peak of the storm's intensity, certain regions experienced rainfall rates reaching up to 7 inches per hour, while other locations recorded a staggering total of 1.6 meters of rainfall within a mere 6-hour span. This other location was the Banqiao Dam. A little after 1 a.m. on August 8th, water at Banqiao crested at more than 100 meters above sea level, surpassing the height of the dam's wave protection wall by 30 centimeters, and the entire structure began to fail. In the dead of night, the deafening roar of water cascading through the dam reverberated in the air, yet the residents sleeping nearby remained blissfully unaware of the impending catastrophe lurking in the darkness. The collapse of the dam unleashed a devastating tidal wave hurtling down the valley at a staggering speed of 50 kilometers per hour, triggering a chain reaction that toppled 62 other dams like dominoes. Within minutes, the relentless force of the water obliterated entire villages, erasing them from the map and leaving behind a scene of utter destruction. The residents in the vicinity stood little chance against the sheer force of the water, and even if by some miracle they managed to survive the initial onslaught of the tidal wave, their ordeal was far from over, as the relentless floodwaters would continue to surge toward them for the next 6 hours. As the clock ticked past midnight on August 8, 1975, the scene at the Banqiao Dam in Henan Province was one of frantic urgency. Workers, illuminated by faint fluorescent bulbs, hurriedly piled sandbags along the dam's walls, desperate to stave off the impending disaster. Typhoon Nina, a deadly tropical cyclone, had just entered the region, and it brought along with it a massive storm, flooding the rivers and water catchment areas. The residents of Henan found themselves in a harrowing race against time, battling the relentless rise of the water. They knew all too well that if the dam were to give way under the pressure, thousands of people would be swept away in the dark of night. But despite their efforts, the odds were stacked against them. The ferocious storm was merciless, and Mother Nature would come out on top. Just after 1 a.m., as if by some cruel twist of fate, the sky had cleared, revealing the twinkling stars peeking out from behind the dissipating storm clouds. In that eerie calm, a voice broke through the tension, shouting, "The water level is going down. The flood is retreating." Relief washed over the exhausted workers, but their joy was short-lived. They wouldn't know that this calm was merely the eye of the storm, and the worst was yet to come. Within seconds, water that was equivalent to 280,000 Olympic-sized swimming pools burst through the dam's walls, shattering the concrete and erupting with tremendous force. The impact was like a thunderous explosion, shaking the ground and sending shockwaves through the air. It had surged forward with a deafening roar, tearing apart everything in its path. As the wall of water hurtled down the valley, it gained momentum, forming into a monstrous wave that stretched 10 kilometers wide and towered 3 to 7 meters high. Its speed was relentless, reaching nearly 50 kilometers per hour, powerful enough to obliterate houses and buildings with ease. In the nearby town of Suiping, sleeping residents were likely awakened by the echoes of giant concrete slabs slamming into the ground, resembling distant gunshots. But before they could even grasp the magnitude of the situation, the relentless force of the water would descend upon them. For more than 6 agonizing hours, the water from the dam surged down the valley, relentlessly sweeping across a vast expanse of land, over an area of 55 kilometers in length and 15 kilometers wide. Entire communities and villages were engulfed and obliterated by the unyielding force of the floodwaters. It's difficult to justify the extent of the devastation in words, but if you were to stand amidst the heart of the impacted area, you would see houses crumbled like cardboard, vehicles tossed like toys, and trees uprooted as if they were mere weeds. Everywhere was wet, everything was destroyed, and unfortunately, it was clear that not everyone had made it through alive. Records indicate that certain areas near the collapsed dam experienced the formation of temporary lakes, some as vast as 12,000 square kilometers. To put this into perspective, that's approximately 16 times the size of the entire country of Singapore. A total of 7 neighboring counties were affected by the floods, with water continuously gushing throughout southern Henan, affecting thousands of square kilometers of countryside and countless communities. The water had spared nothing in its path, and tens of thousands of people had perished, for now. But the question is, it would have taken several hours for the water to reach the farther counties. So why didn't the government warn people to evacuate? Well, there are several reasons for this. The entire Henan Province had been battered by storms from the typhoon for days before the incident, making communication extremely difficult due to the harsh weather conditions. It was also the 1970s, and the most advanced communication devices available were telegraphs or telephones. However, the severe weather had knocked out telephone lines, rendering them useless and cutting out any form of wireless communication. Interestingly, records state that a unit from the Chinese military had been tasked with firing signal flares into the sky to alert neighboring counties of the emergency. But unfortunately, these signals were misinterpreted and no action was taken. As a result, the vast majority of residents in the 7 counties were completely unaware of the impending disaster until it was upon them. The devastating aftermath of the dam's collapse didn't end there. In fact, the sheer force of the water had triggered a chain reaction of other dam failures in the region. Because Banqiao had collapsed first, the tremendous force of the unleashed water had caused multiple other dams in the region to fail. One by one, they succumbed to the pressure, amplifying the force of the floodwaters with each collapse. The government had quickly realized that many other dams had collapsed due to the gushing water streams, and they needed to act fast to stop the water's momentum. Otherwise, it would spread further inland and affect more people. As a result, authorities directed the Air Force to deliberately destroy the dams with airstrikes to release water in specific directions. The goal was to decrease the main flow of water and disperse it, in the hope that it would slow down the momentum. However, the water continued to flow, flooding the Quan River, the largest tributary of the Ying River within the Huai River watershed. The dikes on the Quan River, barriers used to regulate water levels from a river, eventually collapsed in the evening of August 9th, and the water rushed towards other nearby regions, completely flooding the county of Fuyang in Anhui Province. The distance from the Banqiao Dam to Anhui Province is approximately 570 kilometers, and it took less than 24 hours for the floodwaters from Banqiao to reach the outskirts of Anhui. Unofficial estimates put the death toll from the dam's collapse at between 85,000 to 240,000 people, but these figures can be inconsistent. There are numerous reports of official casualties, with each report differing from the next. In August 1975, preliminary figures from the Committee of the Communist Party in Henan indicated that around 85,600 people from Henan had perished in the disaster, with the total death toll estimated to be under 100,000 when including individuals from outside the province. The committee considered these figures relatively accurate and reported them to the Central Committee of the Chinese Communist Party. However, in the 1980s, several representatives of the Chinese People's Political Consultative Conference revealed that the death toll from the 1975 Banqiao Dam's failure was more than 230,000 people. In 1995, Human Rights Watch supported this claim, stating in its report that this number was likely accurate. In 2005, a program on the Discovery Channel rated the dam's failure as the greatest technological catastrophe in the world, surpassing even the Chernobyl nuclear disaster in the Soviet Union. The Discovery Channel later cited the death toll as over 200,000, which included more than 140,000 deaths from famine, infections, and epidemics. Famine and disease were the silent killers of that period, arguably more deadly than the event itself. In the following weeks after the floods, the Jingguang Railway, a major transportation route from Beijing to Guangzhou, was cut for 18 days, along with the other critical communication lines. This spelled disaster for the victims, and their agony was only going to get worse. They were cut off from help, so aid and disaster relief supplies couldn't reach them quickly. Despite the government deploying more than 40,000 soldiers from the People's Liberation Army troops for disaster relief, all communication with and from the affected cities was either cut off or impossible to establish. To grasp the magnitude of the dam's collapse, records show that 9 days after the incident, over 1 million people were still stranded by the floodwaters, relying on food airdrops as they were inaccessible to disaster relief workers. They were hungry, cold, and sleeping without shelter. And with the floodwaters came diseases like malaria and yellow fever, which ravaged the survivors. There was hardly any medicine or medical treatment available, and food was nowhere to be found. Those afflicted by disease were left with no other choice but to await death, and those who were not infected died of starvation. The damage to the area was estimated to be around $513 million. And when adjusted for inflation, this amounts to approximately $3 billion. If a similar situation were to occur in modern China, a $3 billion loss might not necessarily cripple the entire economy, but it would still pose other significant burdens. The immediate cost of repairing infrastructure, providing aid to affected areas, and rebuilding communities would strain government resources. This could lead to budget deficits or increased borrowing, which may have long-term effects on the economy. And the disruptions to transportation routes and communication lines could hamper trade and commerce, affecting close to every industry across the country. The Jingguang Railway, being a major transportation artery, would cause delays in the movement of goods and people, impacting supply chains and millions of lives. Today, if you ask people outside of Henan Province in China about the Banqiao Dam collapse, you're unlikely to hear much. Because even though the dam's collapse was seen as one of the deadliest structural failures in history, it was frantically covered up by the Chinese government. You see, the 1970s were a time of significant political and social changes under the leadership of Chairman Mao Zedong. The government's primary focus was on maintaining stability and promoting the image of the Communist Party as infallible and capable of leading the country towards prosperity. However, admitting to a catastrophic failure of such a major project could undermine the government's authority and destroy its reputation. The Communist Party had to maintain control over information and present a united front to the public, so they decided to suppress news of the disaster to avoid public backlash and maintain political stability. Records state that after the disaster, the Chinese government maintained silence, and no media outlets were permitted to report on the event. Any official documents regarding the disaster were considered to be state secrets, and it wasn't until 2005 that they were eventually declassified. Today, the tragic events of the Banqiao Dam's collapse, which led to the deaths of hundreds and thousands of people, have not been forgotten. But there's no denying that it has largely faded from public memory, either overshadowed by other historical events or by the government's efforts to keep it under wraps. Today, China has already begun another massive wave of dam construction projects. In 2015, it completed construction of one of the world's largest dams, the Three Gorges Dam in Hubei Province. However, in 2020, Beijing admitted that the 2.4-kilometer dam had deformed slightly due to record flooding, but later emphasized that it was perfectly safe. Mass Murders is a One-Up Media original. A quick word on our reenactments and dramatizations. While we can't know exactly what they say, think, or feel at the moment, it is all based on research. This episode was executive produced by Guang Jin, produced and written by Ethan Sam, edited by Alex, narrated by Jason, audio experience by Ethan Sam, with additional engineering by Ashley from One Up Media. Thank you for listening. We'll see you in the next one.